Welcome to Highfalutin Low Carb, the almost weekly web series where we find and test the best low carb recipes this crazy internet has to offer. Today, we're going to be tackling a Thanksgiving table favorite, pumpkin pie. Stay tuned. No Thanksgiving table in America would be complete without pumpkin pie. And just because we're eating a low carb or keto diet doesn't mean that we don't get to participate as well. Pumpkin, especially canned pumpkin, is easy to use, easy to find, and it's got a fairly high fiber content. So as long as we're smart about the rest of the ingredients, there's no reason we can't enjoy a pumpkin pie. So I've taken the liberty of narrowing down our options to two recipes from online, the two most popular ones, and there were a couple of criteria here. One of those was that it is very common, I see, in the low carb pumpkin pie world to make pumpkin pie cheesecake. And I get that because it's easy to substitute some of the pumpkin out for cream cheese, which is very low carb. So yeah, it does lower the carbs, but I didn't want to include one of those recipes because pumpkin pie cheesecake is another animal into itself. I'm sure it's delicious and I'm sure it's great, but today we're just dealing with your regular old pumpkin pie just like you've had for the rest of your life. So we're going to work on that. The other criteria was that this needed to have a crust on it. A lot of the low carb pumpkin pie recipes online or in books do not have a crust. And again, that's another easy way to keep the carb count low. And while that's probably great, a crustless pumpkin pie does not sound terribly great to me. That sounds like sort of like a custard. So it had to have a crust. It couldn't have been a cheesecake version. The third thing was there are some really nice no-bake pumpkin pie recipes. And I've tried those, and while they're great, they're not the same texture. They're not. They use gelatin to set up the pie instead of making a true custard, and it just didn't do it for me. Lastly, a lot of the recipes for pumpkin pie, or several of them, use fiber syrup. That is the liquid fiber syrup. There's several brands of it. Carb Yum is one, Sucrin Fiber Syrup Gold. Those are extremely good, and I know that because if you will refer to my blood sugar battle video, I'll link it up here. I tested my fasting blood sugar with a lot of the artificial and natural sweeteners just to see what the response was. Fiber syrup, for me, skyrocketed my blood sugar, more so over twice that of just regular table sugar for equal amounts. So for me, fiber syrup is not an option. So for for today's testing, I did not include fiber syrup in that. One of the recipes we are going to test does call for fiber syrup, but she specifically says that you can substitute Sucrin Gold or some of another granulated erythritol product. So that's what I'm going to do. So today's two contestants are low carb sugar-free pumpkin pie by Sugar-Free Mom, and the other contestant is low carb pumpkin pie recipe by Low Carb Yum. And you know these names well if you've watched this channel at all. Those are some of our go-tos for some of our better recipes. So it's no coincidence that I chose these. And it's no coincidence that they're also some of the most popular ones online, probably because they've been tested numerous times and people like them. So let's get started. We've got to make crusts for both of these. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the crust that has to be blind baked. So we're going to have to bake this in a pie shell first. The other one says not to bake it. It literally, the instruction says one unbaked coconut flour crust. So I am skeptical of that, but we're going to bake the crust along with the custard. So one of those needs to go in the oven now. So this is the pie crust, low carb coconut flour pie crust that goes with the Sugar-Free Mom's pumpkin pie. So let's get started. Okay, so for this recipe, we just need to combine our eggs. That is 2 eggs. This is olive oil, and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And we just mix this with a mixer. This is coconut flour. We're going to add to that a teaspoon of salt. That's our swerve sweetener. Whisk that together good. In a food processor, we're going to add the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients. The secret ingredient here is cold cubed butter. These are small pieces. Those go right in. Process until it looks like crumbles. we just roll this out between 2 pieces of parchment paper. And let's see what the dough feels like. It should form a ball pretty readily. So just like that. And then we're going to roll it out between 2 pieces of parchment paper. Second piece of parchment paper right on top. And then let's just take it. Now, getting this off of here might be easier said than done. Okay, so now we've got it'll crumble apart like that. You're gonna have to be careful. If you lose some, just pick it up and push it back down into the pan and keep on going. You're gonna take some of this off, but now we're gonna try to give ourselves a nice decorative edge here. All right, so we've got our roughly assembled pie shell. That's pretty rustic, I guess you could say. But we need to dock this with a fork. Just randomly poke some holes in it. This keeps the steam from making the bottom of the pie bubble up as we blind bake it. So you may want to make sure to do this. And then she also said to use some, if you have a pie crust protector. I don't. Then to use aluminum foil and make something to protect the outside rim of the crust from getting too brown. You want to do this if you're going to bake it again, which we are. We're going to, once we fill it with our filling, right, we have to bake it. So this is supposed to help protect the top of the crust from getting too brown on the second bake. So we follow instructions. Is what we are doing. They make a little contraption that just sort of fits over here like a lid, and this is when you kind of wish you had one. Now, don't knock your crust off with your thing like I just did almost. I need one more little piece right there. Okay, now we're putting this in a 400-degree oven for 10 minutes and taking it out and letting it cool. And while this is cooking, we're going to start on our second pie crust, okay? Meet you back here. Okay, this one is our second crust. This is the coconut flour pie crust recipe from Lowcarb Yum. Her instructions do say to blind bake this in the pie crust recipe, but then in the pumpkin pie recipe, she says make the crust and don't bake it. It's called for one unbaked coconut flour crust. So I would have thought that you needed to blind bake it, but I'm going to follow the instructions because that's what she said and she was explicit about it. So we're going to start here with some melted butter, and to that we're going to add the eggs, 2 eggs, the sweetener, and the salt. You just simply stir in your sifted coconut flour. It's pretty easy. So this should come together as a dough, and we're going to do the same thing, try to roll it out and see what we come up with. This is a lot softer than that other dough. Really a lot softer. So let's see what we can do here. The other dough was a little more traditional in that it used cold butter that we cut into it using a food processor. And just feeling this melted butter sort of makes me appreciate that method, though it does take a lot more work. It does feel a lot more sturdy. So, it's pretty close. This had less flour in it, so there's just less of a batter, period. So let's see what we can do. Ooh, let's try it. Yeah, it's cracking apart like crazy. I think you'd have done better just to do it in the pie shell. Look at that. Look at that. Told you I'm not a great baker. But this is the reality of life here. So what we're going to do is she even mentions that you could make this in the pie pan and mash this down into the crust. So maybe that's what I should have done. Okay, well, I am the first to admit that that is not the prettiest pie shell in the kitchen. It was just too aggravating. The melted butter didn't hold up well for me. So who knows how it'll taste. It did say to dock it, and I mean, I really think that this should be baked, but her instructions specifically say 1 coconut flour, her recipe for coconut flour pie crust unbaked. So this is going to go raw on the back burner back here and just wait until we get our custards made for the pumpkin pie, and we'll go from there. Be back. All right, so now on to the fillings, and this is pretty easy. We're going to make the fillings for both of these pies. The first one is the one from Sugar Free Mom. This is the pie crust that we've already blind baked in the back. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this together. This is the eggs, and this is a can of pumpkin puree. Now, when you buy pumpkin, this probably goes without saying. Make sure you're buying 100% pure pumpkin and not pumpkin pie filling. They're sold right beside each other in the grocery store. The cans look an awful lot alike, but pumpkin pie filling has sugar and spices and all the stuff that's already in it, and is a no-go on a low-carb diet. Make sure you're just buying pure pumpkin. That's all you need. So we're gonna, this is our eggs, our pumpkin. This is the recipe that called for fiber syrup. As I said, I can't use that, so she specifically said you could use Sucrin Gold. This is the brown sugar alternative, and it is tasty, and I love it. It's one of my favorite alternative sweeteners, so we're using that today. She did say to use a little bit more of it, like a half a cup instead of a third of a cup. And to that, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice. This is a half a cup of heavy whipping cream. And now you need a teaspoon of vanilla and a teaspoon of maple extract, which sounds delicious. Okay, so whiz this up and pour it in our pie shell. Okay, here's the pre-baked pie shell. In the custard goes. Certainly looks a lot like a regular old pumpkin pie, doesn't it? This goes into a 350-degree oven for 40 minutes or so. She also specifically says to cover the crusts again, or that they will burn, so we're going to do that. This is hard to do without knocking the crust off, actually. This is where one of those little things you can buy comes in handy, I suspect. Precarious, but into the oven it goes. I'll meet you right back here because we're about to make the second pie. All right, so we're back to make the filling for the other pie, and this is the one by Low Carb Yum, and it's basically a lot of the same ingredients, except oddly this doesn't have vanilla or the maple extract in it, neither one of those, so I'm curious of how that plays out. So we basically have the 15 ounces of pumpkin pie filling. I'm going to use the same sweetener that I used in the other pie, just so that's less of a variance in this. So that's pumpkin, that's the Sucrin Gold. It does call for a bit more sugar, about a quarter cup more sugar than the other one. And then this is cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg. This recipe did not call for the pumpkin pie spice. It actually called for assembling those yourself. So I'm curious how that might change things. So we just combine all of this. Okay, now to this we are going to add the eggs, and it's like an egg and 3 egg yolks. So it's not just whole eggs. Combine these, it said. And then it said to gradually pour in the heavy whipping cream. So I'm just going to put this on low and slowly add this into our batter here. Now, again, I did not bake this. The pie shell recipe said to bake it before you used it, but then her pumpkin pie recipe specifically said you make it sure it's an unbaked shell. So I'm adding this to the unbaked shell, and since it was a little bit less dough, I don't have the edges around the ends that hopefully won't burn. So I don't think I need to cover those. So let's just put this in, and in the oven it goes. Also for about 30 to 40 minutes. Okay. Okay, so here's our second pie. This is going to go in the oven, and I'm going to cook both of these for the required amount of time. I'm going to let them cool and rest for 15 minutes, and then we're going to be back here and we're going to test these in 5, 4, 3, 2. Look at how beautiful. This one down here is the low-carb, sugar-free pumpkin pie by Sugar-Free Mom. And that's the one that had what to me looks like a proper crust. And then the other one up here is the Low-Carb Yum, their low-carb pumpkin pie recipe. This one's 5.7 grams of net carbs per slice, and this one is 6. So literally, they're right on top of each other as far as carb count goes for net carbs. All right, these have been cooling for about 40 minutes. They've been out of the oven, and they're still warm to the touch. Once they cool for about an hour on a cooling rack, they both need to go in the fridge, and that's where we're going to get that firm pumpkin pie, custardy texture. However, just because of the busy nature of the season and some other issues, I'm going to go ahead and taste these because I can't wait any longer. To get this video out to you in time for Thanksgiving, I just got to go ahead and taste them. Now, first of all, look at this. The crust looks good, but you can tell why you needed see right here by the handles where it's dark, where it burned. It's slight, but it is dark. I mean, it shows up darker on camera. But that is where, you see I had these little things. These obviously work. And that was the part that was uncovered, so I should have used a longer piece of foil and gone all the way around. And I should have done the same, it didn't say to, but I should have on this pie, because look at the crust. It's so thin up here, it did get a little too brown for my taste. It's probably gonna taste just fine. But so let's slice one of these guys, and again, I'm just gonna do a very small slice because it's probably gonna be much softer than it will be after it chills for a while. I'm just gonna come all the way across. So, yeah, it's still a little soft, but we knew that, and that's okay. It's going to go in the fridge here shortly. I'm just going to take a tiny little sliver because, A, I don't need much, and I want it to stay together and not spread. So, I'll sacrifice the burnt crust for me to taste. I won't give that piece to you. He's cutie patootie. His little crust fell off. Texture looks pretty good. Like I said, it's a little soft right now, and my crust fell off. He would be prettier like that. And of course, with some whipped cream on this, yes ma'am. But for today, we're just gonna test it with the pie. I don't want anything to interfere with the recipe that we're trying to test. So let's swap this out. This is the Low Carb Yum, and it looks a little softer. So let's just come in here and cut us a slice. It is a little softer. Maybe it needed to bake a little bit more. I don't know, maybe it's the mixture. We're gonna find out though. Again, just a little sliver. Wish I had heeded my own advice and used one of those crust covers for this one. This one's a good bit more liquidy for now. And after it's refrigerated, it won't be, I assure you. So here we go. Sugar-Free Mom, Low Carb Yum. They look pretty good, I gotta say. They look like a traditional pie, but I gotta say, just looks-wise, the Sugar-Free Mom looks like it's holding together a little better. All right, so pumpkin pie, let's check it out. Crust on this looks really good. Crust on that looks real good on the bottom. Pumpkin pie. Does not taste sugar-free at all. Does not, Let me taste this crust by itself. Yeah. That is a beautiful flaky pie crust. Look at that. Beautiful flaky pie crust. I'm really impressed with that. Okay, so that was the sugar-free mom. Now, low carb yum. The crust on this is a lot thicker because if you remember, this is the one I couldn't get to roll out and I just had to do it by hand. It actually baked pretty well. I guess you didn't have to blind bake it. So, look at that. That's flaky. You can see, I'm leaving behind some of the pumpkin. This is going to firm up in the fridge. Wow. Again, flaky crust. I will give the sugar-free mom, I think her crust is a little better. It's a lot, not a lot. It is a little more work because it needs a food processor and some things, but y'all, these are both really good. They're almost indistinguishable flavor wise. They both are so similar that you can't even tell the difference. But I think in the order of my preference is the sugar-free mom. I'm going to give it to her just for the crust and the slightly firmer texture of the pumpkin custard that is the filling. And then second place is obviously the low carb yum, but truthfully, either one of these is going to make a beautiful addition to a low carb Thanksgiving table. I could probably tell you that I could serve either one of these and nobody would ever know that it was low carb or sugar-free. I cannot detect an artificial sweetener at all. Really super pleased with that. And I don't know if that's a testament to the recipe in general or the Sucrin Gold brown sugar, because that is a convincing brown sugar substitute and it doesn't spike my sugar and I really like it. So there you have it, folks. Low carb pumpkin pie. It was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, and the results actually were spectacular for both of these. Now, links to both of these recipes are in the video description below. I often don't include a lot of pertinent information about the recipes as I'm making them, like the amount of some of the ingredients, because if you want to make one of these, I want to drive you to their channel or their website, because they're the ones who did the sugar-free mom and low carb yum are the ones who did the hard work of creating these recipes. So I just want to send some love their way. As you know, these videos are a way for me to maintain my low-carb way of eating, and staring into the end of this camera every week helps keep me honest. So I really appreciate that you've come along for the journey. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button below. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe. This is basically a half-hour cooking show every week where we pit recipes, low-carb recipes against one another and determine a winner. And if we can't find one, we'll make one. If you're a Patreon member, I ask that you check out my Patreon account. If you don't know what Patreon is, think of it as a tip jar for the internet. It allows people like you who enjoy things that creators like me create, and you can donate $1 or $2 a month just to keep things going and support the creators that you like. I've also had people asking about logo merchandise. I don't know why, but apparently some people would like some. So I've got a Spreadshirt account listed below where you can get t-shirts, aprons, mugs, the whole shebang. So there it is, low carb pumpkin pie. Find a recipe, let me know what you think. Happy Thanksgiving.